People are vanishing quietly. You notice it if you look closely. Friends stop posting. Colleagues walk away from careers that once defined them. Couples separate without much explanation. At first, it seems random, like people are just tired of the noise. But if you pay attention, there's a pattern. They are leaving not with bitterness or grand declarations, but with a kind of steady clarity. They're slipping into solitude, reducing their contact with society, disappearing into the background of ordinary life. Carl Jung saw this before most people could articulate it. He called it the necessary withdrawal. For him, it wasn't some romantic escape or vague longing for peace. It was a direct consequence of consciousness itself. The deeper your awareness grows, the less you can endure the unconsciousness that most of society runs on. What used to feel normal starts to feel unbearable, not metaphorically, but in your body. Your nervous system can't take it anymore. Jung believed this wasn't avoidance but survival. The psyche itself knows when it cannot continue in an environment without damage. Imagine trying to hold your breath in a room filling with smoke. At first, you manage. After a while, your body revolts. You're not weak for leaving that room. You're preserving your life. Withdrawal, for the psychologically awake, functions in the same way. It's not antisocial. It's protective. Why does this happen? Because society is built on collective unconsciousness, shared illusions, mass projections, agreed upon fictions. People call it normal life, but underneath, it's a system that depends on everyone playing along without noticing. It's not that the system has flaws. The illusions are the system. If even a few people wake up and stop participating, the machinery grinds awkwardly. The awakened person becomes like a glitch in the code. They see what others refuse to see, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. This was Jung's experience too. As he moved through his own process of individuation, he found himself increasingly unable to tolerate the everyday social scripts. It wasn't arrogance or misanthropy. It was that he felt like the only conscious person in a room where everyone else was talking in their sleep. Every conversation demanded that he pretend ignorance. Every social exchange required him to perform a role he had already outgrown. That is the real loneliness of consciousness. Not being alone, but being unseen among people who cannot even register what you've discovered. So those who wake up begin to retreat. They don't make speeches about it. They simply recognize that staying means betraying their inner truth. To keep playing along would mean dimming their light, compressing their depth, performing sleep while fully awake. The psyche cannot sustain that contradiction forever. At some point, it forces a choice: withdraw or collapse. One of the deepest reasons this withdrawal becomes necessary is shadow work. When you've faced your own darkness, really faced it, you can no longer tolerate watching society hurl its shadow outward unchecked. You see scapegoating for what it is. You watch two political parties, each convinced of its moral superiority, projecting disowned parts of themselves onto the other side. You see mobs raging online, not realizing their shadow, boxing with their own disowned traits. From the outside, it feels like mass delusion. And that's exactly what Jung said it is: a collective psychosis fueled by denial. When you've integrated your own shadow, watching this unfold becomes unbearable. You can't join in. You can't pick a side when you see both are acting out unconscious projections. You can't engage in blame when you know it's just a mirror turned outward. The awakened person can only step away. Not because they're too pure, but because the projections land like violence. It's not judgment, it's sensitivity. The more conscious you become, the more you feel the weight of unconsciousness around you. It's like being tuned to a frequency that makes static painful. Jung experienced this sensitivity personally. After his confrontation with the unconscious, crowds became difficult for him to endure. It wasn't that he disliked people. It was that he could feel the swirling storm of projections, repressions, and shadows that others remained oblivious to. What most people interpret as normal social energy, he experienced as psychological chaos. This is why the first place people disappear from is often social media. The endless feed of outrage, blame, projection. It becomes intolerable once you recognize what it really is. Each scroll feels like watching people punch their own reflections and then blame the mirror for the bruises. For someone who has integrated even a fraction of their shadow, this is not entertainment. It's exhausting. There's another layer too. Jung realized that once someone has touched their authentic self, they can no longer perform their persona without paying a psychological price. Society depends on persona. Every workplace requires a mask. Families have roles that keep order. Friend groups have unwritten scripts. Before awakening, people play these parts unconsciously. Smile when expected. Say the right things. Project the right image. After awakening, that performance feels like suffocation. Jung knew this firsthand. After his own transformation, he couldn't simply return to being the respectable Swiss psychiatrist. He couldn't pretend to hold opinions he saw through or maintain connections that required falseness. He had to withdraw to Bollingen, his retreat by the lake. There, he could live without pretending, without constantly compressing himself back into persona. It wasn't antisocial, it was necessary for authenticity. The same thing happens today. A successful executive goes through deep inner work, integrates her shadow, touches her authentic self. Suddenly, boardroom meetings feel unbearable. Everyone is playing a part. Every word is part of the executive role. For her, it's like being asked to pretend to be someone who never existed. Her authentic self has no place there. She doesn't explode or rebel. She simply fades out, moves to a quieter life, and finally feels real instead of successful. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation requiring withdrawal. Society values persona performance, but once you know your authentic self, you cannot keep betraying it without paying a price. That price is energy. Conscious people spend immense energy just existing in unconscious spaces. They have to filter constant projections, hold firm boundaries against energy drains, translate between depth and surface, and resist being pulled into collective dramas. Jung called this invisible burden psychological labor. It is no wonder that the awakened often suffer exhaustion, strange illnesses, or depression that can't be explained medically. It isn't personal pathology. It's depletion from swimming against the current of collective unconsciousness. For unconscious people, daily life feels like floating downstream. For conscious people, it's like pushing upstream through a torrent. Eventually, the body forces retreat. Jung worked with patients who lived this. One was a teacher who developed severe chronic fatigue. Tests showed nothing physically wrong. Together, they realized her exhaustion came from the sheer effort of maintaining consciousness in a classroom filled with unconscious dynamics. Every day demanded vigilance, restraint, translation, boundary holding. Her psyche finally collapsed under the pressure. When she withdrew from teaching and moved into solitude, her health returned within weeks. She wasn't sick. She was depleted. Withdrawal restored her energy because it removed the constant drain of unconscious contact. This is why so many awakened people seek out nature, solitude, or small intentional communities. They're not shirking responsibility. They're protecting the consciousness they've cultivated. To stay in environments that erode it would be like pouring water into sand. The psyche demands preservation. Jung recognized this as an archetypal stage, the hermit phase. It appears in myths, spiritual traditions, and psychological journeys alike. It isn't misanthropy. It's transformation. The hermit withdraws to integrate what society would fragment, to hear the inner voice without competing noise, to develop depth without interference. Jung himself required years of solitude to consolidate his insights. He wasn't hiding, he was gestating. That's the paradox. What looks like disappearance is actually deepening. To the outside world, the awakened person seems to vanish. In truth, they're moving inward, building a foundation society cannot see. They're not weak or lost, they're preparing. When Jung studied this pattern more deeply, he noticed something important. The hermit phase is not the end of the journey. It's a midpoint. Withdrawal is necessary, but it's not meant to be permanent isolation. It is the phase where transformation completes in private, where the psyche solidifies into something that no longer bends under collective pressure. What looks like absence is preparation. Consider the philosopher who abandoned his academic life for 3 years. To his colleagues, it seemed like a collapse, a wasted career. But when he returned, his work was different, bolder, deeper, almost impossible to have written from within the structures he had left. Withdrawal gave him the freedom to break out of the persona that academia demanded. Only in solitude could his authentic self refine insights powerful enough to challenge the very system he had stepped away from. This is the deeper truth. People who disappear often come back with gifts. They re-enter, not into the old mainstream roles, but into the edges of society where consciousness can breathe. They show up as healers, guides, artists, or teachers who offer something born of solitude. They can't rejoin the sleepwalk, but they can extend a hand to those who are beginning to stir. Jung described them as border dwellers. They live at the margins, not absorbed into the unconscious collective, but not entirely gone either. They're available to those who are ready, invisible to those who are not. Their lives often look smaller by conventional standards, less visible, less socially celebrated, but their depth is immense. They are lanterns at the edge of the dark forest, quiet guides for those beginning the same path. The return is always different from what the collective expects. Society often interprets disappearance as failure. Why did she leave her career? Why did he stop participating in politics? Why is she wasting her potential? But from the inside, the truth is opposite. They didn't fail to adapt. They succeeded in finding their authentic self. They walked away not from weakness, but from the strength to stop betraying who they had become. One of Jung's patients, a therapist, lived this arc. She withdrew completely for 2 years, vanishing from her practice. When she returned, she didn't resume her old work. She couldn't. General therapy, with its surface-level focus, felt hollow to her. Instead, she worked only with individuals in spiritual emergency, those going through what she had endured. Her practice was tiny, invisible to the larger field, but profoundly transformative for the few who found her. She no longer served the collective en masse. She served those at the edge, exactly where she herself had stood. This is the pattern. The awakened leave mass society, but reappear in parallel structures, small alternative spaces, and hidden corners. They create places where authenticity can exist without constant compromise. These are not replacements for society. They're prototypes, early architectures of something the collective may one day need. Jung believed this was not regression, but evolution. The few who awaken first carve out the paths and build the shelters for those who will come after. What seems like abandonment is often architecture. Disappearing isn't rejection, it's construction. They are building a place to hold consciousness when the collective becomes ready. The logic behind this is simple. Once you see through the collective shadow, you can't pretend you don't. Once you discover your authentic self, you can't return to persona without suffocating. Once you've experienced the exhaustion of swimming against unconsciousness, you learn that preservation is essential. Once the hermit phase begins, you realize integration requires silence. And when you return, you carry something that only solitude could have given you. Think of it like a cycle: withdrawal, transformation, return. Jung compared it to mythic journeys. The hero who leaves the ordinary world, faces trials in solitude, and eventually returns with a boon. But the return is not to resume the old role. It is to bring something new. The awakened don't come back to reinforce the system. They come back to quietly seed something different. Jung emphasized that disappearance is not escape. It's evolution. Not weakness, but wisdom. The hermit's path is archetypal. It shows up across cultures and centuries because the psyche requires it. When you're integrating at the deepest levels, you need protection from the noise and demands of unconscious environments. The hermit phase is not a luxury. It is survival for the soul. Society often struggles with this because it experiences the disappearance of awakened people as loss. It wonders, where did the wise voices go? Why do the most thoughtful individuals withdraw when their insight is needed most? But Jung would argue they aren't abandoning the collective. They're preparing something that the collective can't yet handle. They're writing words that will make sense later. They're living examples of authenticity that will matter when more people are ready to see. And yes, not everyone returns. Some remain in solitude for the rest of their lives. But even then, their disappearance shapes the collective indirectly. The absence itself becomes a quiet critique, a living question. What kind of society cannot hold its most conscious members? Their silence echoes louder than participation could. For many, though, the hermit phase ends with re-emergence. They come back not to the mainstream, but to the edges. They become writers who map the inner terrain, artists who create from authentic depth, healers who work one-on-one, teachers who speak to small circles instead of stadiums. They never quite rejoin the center because the center demands persona. But at the margins, they can offer truth without compromise. And this is crucial. Once you individuate, you cannot reverse it. Once you've integrated shadow, you cannot unknow it. Once you've met your authentic self, you cannot pretend you're just a persona again. Jung observed that his patients who truly individuated never went back to their old lives. They created new ones, simpler, quieter, but aligned. They gave up scale for depth. They traded visibility for authenticity. And they discovered that their contributions, while smaller, carried far greater weight. This is why the disappearing are not truly gone. They are reconfiguring. They are creating the conditions for authentic contribution, which means smaller audiences, slower impact, but deeper resonance. They are invisible to the masses, but vital to the few. And in that, they plant seeds the collective will eventually need. Jung would want those who feel the urge to withdraw to understand: you are not failing. You are not antisocial. You are not broken. You are following a pattern older than history itself. The hermit phase is the psyche's way of preserving what has been born in you. It is the container that allows transformation to complete. And when you return, if you return, you will carry something the world needs, even if it doesn't know it yet. So when you feel the pull to disappear, listen. Step back without guilt. Find your Bollingen. whether it's a literal place or a psychological stance. Protect your consciousness like the rare resource it is. Stop pouring it into environments that erode it. Stop performing for audiences that can't see you. Stop translating depth into surface just to fit in. Your disappearance is not abandonment. It is preparation. It is love of truth, love of authenticity, love of what consciousness demands. And love sometimes requires distance. The collective may not understand. It may label you antisocial, aloof, even selfish. But Jung would remind you, and the deepest service you can give is to fully individuate, to become whole, even if it means being alone. And when you re-emerge, you'll be different. You won't return to reinforce the illusions. You'll return to offer something genuine to those ready for it. You'll speak truths that couldn't be spoken before. You'll hold space that couldn't exist without solitude. You'll live in a way that shows others there is an alternative to sleepwalking. This is why awakened people disappear. Not because they hate the collective, but because they love what they have found too much to betray it. They withdraw to protect it, to cultivate it, and to return with it when the time is right. Disappearance is not failure, it is evolution. It is not rejection, it is archetypal necessity. Withdraw, transform, return. And when you do, you'll discover that what felt like absence was actually the beginning of something society desperately needs, even if it doesn't know it yet.